Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 10-Minute C Discussion podcast, where I, Nora, your host, will break some exciting news from Southeast Asia, fast-growing region in the Asian continent. Now let's stream into our 14th episode, when disruption becomes the norm of supply chain. Is resilience enough? For this episode, it's my great honor today to have the reparticipation of our former guest, Michael Drill, CEO of Mekong Partners and co-chairman of the sourcing committee at the French Chamber of Commerce in Vietnam. Today, he shares his viewpoints about how the supply chain should adapt in a world of constant, unpredictable disruption. Hi, Michael. How are you today?
Very good. How about you?
I'm doing okay too. And before we start, I just want to say congratulations on your new role as a co-chairman of the sourcing committee at the French Chamber of Commerce in Vietnam. And I really, really appreciate that you managed to spare some time to talk to me today.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me.
Okay, Michael, as an expert in supply chain strategies, I believe that you have witnessed several times that the conflict caused months of disruption because supply chain lags. And I'm sure that it's no longer new regarding the ongoing conflicts in the Middle East between Iran and the US. But recently and finally, some good news has come. Officials from both countries confirmed that they reached a peace deal and the Straits of Hormuz will be soon reopened, allowing for toll-free shipments. But I don't want to be, pessimistic, honestly. Given on the on and off tensions we've witnessed so far at this critical point of global shipment, I think it's still relatively uncertain to set a date when all these hurdles really end and whether we can return to our pre-conflict normal. Until we reach that point, businesses must find ways to brace themselves crossing these headwinds. Now, prior to our deeper talk today, I want to rewind a bit to the past to see whether there were any lessons in a similar situation that Asia's and also Vietnam's businesses can readapt to the current situation. For the past 5 years, the world supply chain has encountered disruption of various degrees from COVID-19 and the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict. What were the typical short-term, or in other words, right-on-spot keys that world businesses relied on to initially subside the effects of these disruptions? And do you have any thoughts on the effectiveness of these approaches? Are there any gaps that haven't been addressed, and can we reuse them now?
When we look at the last major shocks, companies reacted with the same instinct. They protected cash, they protected flow, and they bought time. During COVID, global companies drew more than $1 trillion in credit lines in a single quarter. That was not fear, but it was more like a clear decision to secure liquidity before the system froze. After the invasion of Ukraine, many European manufacturers extended their working capital buffers by 20 to 30 days almost immediately. Production stayed stable, but a large amount of capital became locked inside the system. Short-term resilience worked, but it came with a real financial cost. Inventory was the second reflex. In 2021, inventory levels in the United States and Europe reached their highest point in roughly 20 years. This kept factories running while borders and logistics were unstable. Later, it created a second wave of write-downs that passed $200 billion worldwide. Inventory acted as a bridge, not really solving like the structural exposure so far. And routing was a third reaction. When the Suez Canal was blocked, ships went around the Cape of Good Hope. That added 10 to 14 days of transit and threw $100,000 in extra fuel for each voyage. It was clearly inefficient, but it kept goods moving. And we see the same pattern today with tensions in the Red Sea and around the Strait of Hormuz. Companies accept higher costs to preserve continuity. So these actions work in the first 90 days. They reduce the immediate shock and keep operations alive. they do not change the underlying structure of the supply chain. Most companies still have limited visibility beyond the first-tier supplier. Many critical suppliers still operate these weak balance sheets. A large share of global supply chains still depends on a small number of upstream nodes in a few countries. We can reuse these short-term levers in the current Middle East context, but only as temporary support. They give leadership teams time to adjust contracts, diversify suppliers, and redesign logistics. The companies actually that perform best in volatility are the ones that treat these tools as a bridge to a new model. So yeah.
Thank you so much for the reintroduction of the short-term measures that you just shared. Now I want to integrate these short-term measures back into our question, limit down to the ASEAN and APAC region. I want to spearhead a bit to Vietnam's market first, where businesses have a relatively heavy reliance on sourcing raw materials. In your opinion, how can the local firms move beyond short-term resilience measures and towards structurally resilient sourcing?
Vietnam's exposure is concentrated in a few external sources. In many key sectors, such as electronics, textiles, furniture, and machinery, more than 70% of inputs still come from China, Korea, and Taiwan. Short-term actions like stockpiling or emergency logistics do not change that dependency. Structural resilience requires a different approach to how companies build and support their supplier base. The first shift is deeper development of local and regional suppliers. The companies that are reducing risk are the ones investing directly in tier 2 and tier 3 suppliers in Vietnam and nearby markets. Japanese manufacturers have done this for years. They co-fund equipments and engineering teams on site and commit to multi-year volumes. This creates capability that did not exist before and locks in more stable relationships. The second shift is internal diversification inside Vietnam. Investors are no longer treating Vietnam as one single production point. They build capacity in the north, support it with operations in the central region, and balance it with facilities in the south. This reduces exposure to local disruptions, such as power issues, labor shortages, or even port congestions, for example. So it also creates internal flexibility, which Vietnam did not have 10 years ago. The third shift is financial stability for suppliers. Many Vietnamese suppliers operate with thin margins and limited access to structured financing. When a shock hits, they are the first to face liquidity stress, and that stress quickly becomes a production problem for their customers. The companies that are improving resilience are the ones using real-time supplier scoring, closer monitoring of cash flow, and financing partnerships that prevent liquidity shocks from stopping production. So Vietnam's next advantage will not be low labor costs. It will be the ability of its supply chain to stay operational during global volatility. Local firms that invest in upstream capability, multi-region redundancy, and supplier financial strength will move from being reactive to being structurally resilient. And that is what investors are already rewarding in their long-term decisions.
Okay. When you mention about long-term resilience, I have this kind of question just popped up in my head. I think that sometimes, besides like conventional pathways like negotiations among countries, companies, and suppliers, sometimes there's a need for an unconventional or even like rule-breaking solution to stay afloat. So should companies accelerate regionalization, that is Asia for Asia supply chain or sourcing, does that create new forms of concentration risk?
choke points now define a large part of global trade risk. The Strait of Hormuz carries around like 20% of global oil flows. The Red Sea handles roughly, I think, 12% of global trade. And the Taiwan Strait see close to 50%, if I'm correct, of global container traffic. Each of these is a single point where a local event can create a global shock. Governments will continue to negotiate and manage security, but companies cannot base their strategy on diplomatic timing. The private sector is already moving. We see more cargo shifting to India's West Coast ports. Indonesia is investing in new eastward corridors that avoid traditional routes. The UAE, United Arab Emirates, is positioning Jebel Ali as a stability hub for companies that want predictable flow, even when other routes are under pressure. These are capital decisions. Asia for Asia is accelerating because volatility forces it. When freight rates move 300 to 400% in a single quarter, finance leaders stop debating and start reallocating production and sourcing. Regional supply chains reduce exposure to long-distance routes and to some geopolitical risks. At the same time, regionalization can create new risks if it is done in a narrow way. If Asia for Asia only means China plus Vietnam, the region stays exposed to the same upstream fragilities in components and materials. A more robust version of regionalization requires a broader base. India, Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines need to take a larger role in components, not only assembly. Some investors are already moving in that direction, spreading capacity across several Asian countries and using Vietnam as one important node, not the only one only. And the unconventional move is, far to break the rule, but more about breaking habits. Companies that treat their supply chains like portfolios with multiple routes, multiple production bases, and multiple financing structures, are the ones reducing exposure to choke points. They design networks that can absorb a closure in one corridor without stopping the entire system.
One last question for me, Michael. We've been talking a lot about different measures, the short term, the long term one, the conventional one, and even the rule-breaking one, like Asia for Asia. So in general, all these measures boil down to the idea that to sustain the business through different thicks and thins, like disruption all over the world. But in a world where disruptions from COVID-19 pandemic to geopolitical flashpoints, like the tensions around the Strait of Hormuz, are becoming the norm rather than the exception. Do you think that resilience is still enough, or do businesses now need to fundamentally rethink efficiency, cost, and even globalization itself? How should businesses restructure or readapt to the current world of quite a lot of unexpected volatility, which impacts the supply chain and logistics at varying degrees?
Resilience is no longer only a defensive idea. It's becoming a clear performance factor. Over the last 4 years, companies with more diversified and flexible supply chains outperform their peers by roughly 15 to 25% in total shareholder return. Not because they were cheaper, but because they stayed operational when others had to slow down or stop. Investors see that and price it in. The old model focused almost only on cost per unit and on maximizing asset utilization. The new model focuses on continuity of service and on the ability to deliver under stress. We see this in capital allocation. Manufacturers are shifting part of their investment from pure automation into redundancy and dual sourcing. Procurement teams are moving from a narrow focus on price to a stronger focus on supplier stability and geographic spread. finance teams are building multi-market and multi-currency structures to reduce exposure to one single country or one single banking system. Globalization is not disappearing. Trade volumes are still growing. What is changing is the shape of globalization. Routes are different, partners are different, and risk tolerance is lower. Companies are building modular supply chains with several production bases, several logistics corridors, and more flexible contracts. They assume volatility will continue and design their networks with that in mind. And to adapt, businesses need to move from linear chains to modular systems. They need better visibility into their suppliers and into the financial health of those suppliers. They need contracts and logistic plans that can switch between routes and modes without months of negotiation. The companies that will lead in this environment are the ones that see resilience not as a cost, but as a driver of long-term performance. Efficiency without stability is not real efficiency. It is fragility.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
Yes, efficiency without stability is actually fragility, correct. Diversifying portfolio, not because it's cheaper, but of course, it helps business stay operational while competitors may have to slow down. And yes, in the current world of continuous competition and unexpected disruption, stay visibility towards suppliers, show better financial health will also help business at different scale stand out no matter what happened with the world. Yeah, so Michael, that was a very long but nice chat with you. It's my pleasure to have you here with me today again. And thank you so much for your viewpoints. Hope that we'll have more chances to talk again and wish you all the best to come.
Anytime. Thank you very much for today.
Thank you so much and goodbye.
Bye.
So that's the end of today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it and found the news interesting. For your convenient reference to further details of the news I mentioned, please find the links to my blog page in the description, where I have compiled all the related information. If you have any questions, or you want to discuss more on what I shared today, please leave your comments below. I would love to talk to each of you more as well. You can search for more episodes of this 10-Minute C Discussion podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Podcasts, and my own blog page. Thank you for listening to today's episode all the way to the end. And I hope to see you again in my next episode of 10-Minute C Discussion, which will be released soon. Once again, this is Nora, your host. Thank you so much and goodbye.